A palace guard witnessed a secret Tiara clash. His words finally vindicate Kate Middleton best story. From the first day he donned the crisp red uniform and the tall bearskin hat, he had understood the weight of his duty. As a palace guard, he was trained to be invisible. Guests came and went. Laughter and chatter filled the rooms, but James was always there, a silent observer, present yet unseen. Over the years, he had witnessed moments that no one else would ever know about. Quiet smiles, private conversations, and sometimes, the tension that simmered behind the palace's glittering doors. That evening, the palace was alive with a special kind of excitement. A grand gala had been organized to honor a visiting diplomat, and the ballroom shimmered with crystal chandeliers, golden accents, and carefully arranged flowers. The air smelled faintly of roses and polished wood. James stood at his post near a tall column, his eyes scanning the room, making sure everything was in place. The guests moved gracefully, exchanging pleasantries and laughter. To the outside world, it was perfect, elegant, and serene. But James had learned that perfection often hid small storms. As the evening unfolded, his gaze drifted toward the Duchess of Cambridge, Kate Middleton. She moved through the crowd with her usual grace, her laughter soft but genuine, her posture straight and confident. Everyone seemed drawn to her warmth. Yet, James noticed a subtle tension in her expressions, a slight tightening around her eyes when she approached one particular guest, a distant member of the royal circle who was known for their strong opinions and exacting nature. It was small at first, a tilt of the head, a hesitant smile, a quiet word exchanged. But James had been trained to notice these subtleties. They spoke volumes to someone who understood the language of the palace. The tension grew as their conversation moved slightly away from the main crowd, closer to a display of precious family heirlooms. Among them was a tiara, delicate and sparkling under the soft glow of the chandeliers. It was not just jewelry. It was a symbol, a representation of history, tradition, and sometimes unspoken competition. James watched closely, his heart quiet but alert. The tiara became the focus, and with it the unspoken clash. Words were exchanged, though quietly, almost inaudible over the hum of polite conversation. Kate's calm composure contrasted with the sharp edge in the other person's tone. It was a dance of dignity and discretion, a delicate balancing act that James knew could easily be misinterpreted by those who only saw snapshots of palace life. He remembered the exact moment the tension peaked. Kate reached out to adjust a strand of her hair, her fingers brushing lightly against the edge of the tiara. The other member leaned slightly closer, their eyes narrowing for just a fraction of a second. No one else noticed. Everyone was watching the champagne being poured, the soft music, the polite smiles. But James saw everything. He saw the care in Kate's movements, the thought behind every word she spoke, and the quiet strength she carried even in moments of subtle pressure. For James, this was more than just an observation. It was a reminder of why he had chosen this life. Guards were not just there to stand at attention or to follow orders. They were witnesses to history in ways that few could imagine. They saw the humanity behind the public image, the small gestures that revealed truth, and the moments that would never make it into newspapers. And yet, despite knowing so much, he could never speak. Silence was part of the oath, part of the unspoken code that bound every guard to the palace. The evening carried on, and the gala continued with its usual rhythm. Dancers twirled in the background, musicians played softly in a corner, and the guests laughed politely at stories told over the tables. James stayed near the column, his eyes flicking from Kate to the other member and back again. He noticed a brief pause in Kate's expression, a moment where she seemed almost to take a deep breath, as if reminding herself that everything would pass, that this too was part of her life. She smiled again, but there was a subtle firmness in the way she held her posture, a quiet message that she would not be intimidated or flustered. It was moments like these that James cherished silently. These were the small, human details behind the pomp and ceremony. To the public, Kate might always appear poised and perfect, but in reality, she navigated complex relationships, expectations, and traditions with thoughtfulness and grace. James had seen enough to know that her strength was not loud or flashy. It was steady, composed, and often invisible to everyone but those who truly paid attention. As the night drew on, the tiara incident faded into the background of the gala, but James could not forget it. He had a memory for details, and he stored every subtle glance, every shift of posture, every word exchanged in a mental archive that he knew might one day become important. He also knew that this memory came with a burden. Guards were meant to protect, not to gossip. They were meant to preserve dignity, not to reveal secrets. And yet, witnessing this quiet clash, he felt the weight of injustice in how someone might misinterpret the evening if they only saw the surface. The gala eventually ended, the guests departing with polite thanks and gentle bows. The chandeliers dimmed, the musicians packed their instruments, and the palace returned to its usual calm. James remained at his post a little longer, ensuring that every door was secure and every corridor quiet. As he walked the halls later that night, the images of the tiara and the exchange played in his mind like a delicate film. He thought about how history could remember moments incorrectly if only the public eye were allowed to judge. He thought about Kate navigating expectations she did not choose, and about the quiet dignity with which she carried herself. That night, as James finally removed his bearskin hat and uniform, he reflected on the life he had chosen. Being a palace guard was not glamorous. It was not about attention or recognition. It was about witnessing the truth and protecting it, even when the world could not see. He understood that some moments, no matter how small, could carry great meaning. And the tiara clash, subtle as it was one of those moments. James lay in bed that night thinking about what he had seen. He did not know if anyone else would ever know the truth, and perhaps they never would. But in his heart, he carried a quiet certainty that Kate Middleton's actions had been measured, thoughtful, and composed. He had witnessed it firsthand. And though he could not speak openly, the memory remained, a silent testament to her dignity and to the small, unseen battles that defined life behind the palace doors. In the quiet of his small room, far from the glittering halls, James realized something important. Sometimes the most powerful stories are not told in newspapers or headlines. They are witnessed by those who see the human moments, the glances, the gestures, the courage quietly displayed in the shadows. And he, James Whittaker, had seen one such story unfold that night, a story that few could understand, but one that he would never forget. After the gala, life in the palace continued as usual, but for James Whittaker, the memory of that night stayed very vivid. He returned to his daily routine, standing tall in his red uniform, patrolling the corridors and watching over the royal family. To the outside world, nothing unusual had happened. Guests smiled for photographs, staff moved gracefully, and the palace seemed as perfect as ever. But James knew better. He had witnessed a quiet tension that no one else could see. It was not long before rumors began to circulate outside the palace walls. Journalists and photographers, always searching for a story, began to speculate about the gala. Some reported that there had been a disagreement, others claimed that Kate Middleton had been involved in a tiara incident. None of the stories were accurate, but they spread quickly. The public, always eager for royal gossip, discussed it endlessly. James watched from a distance as headlines appeared, each one more exaggerated than the last. Inside the palace, the effect of these rumors was subtle but noticeable. Kate continued her duties with the same composure she was known for, greeting guests, attending meetings, and performing her charitable work. Yet James observed small moments of frustration that revealed the weight of the misunderstanding. There were sighs when she thought no one was watching, a slight frown when reading letters or news clippings, and moments when she seemed to gather herself before walking into public events. She carried her dignity well, but James could sense the quiet burden of misjudgment pressing on her. James knew that people outside could never understand the pressures of life within the palace. To them, the royals seemed distant, untouchable, and almost like characters in a storybook. But James had seen the human side, the effort it took to maintain grace under constant scrutiny, the small personal victories that no one else noticed, and the quiet moments of strength that defined the people behind the public image. That night with the tiara had been one such moment. As the rumors grew, James noticed another challenge emerging. Staff members who were loyal but curious began whispering about what might have happened. Even small gestures, how Kate had smiled politely at someone, or how she had handled the adjustment of the tiara, were discussed and misinterpreted. James felt the weight of his silence more heavily than ever. Guards were trained to observe, not interfere, but keeping the truth hidden while watching false stories spread was difficult. He understood that revealing anything could break the trust of the royal family and his own code of duty. Yet staying silent felt almost like allowing an injustice to continue. Outside the palace, the media frenzy grew. News articles speculated on Kate's reactions, sometimes portraying her as overly strict or dramatic. Social media was even harsher, with users drawing conclusions based on limited photos and brief video clips. Some claimed to understand her emotions, but they only saw the surface. James found it both frustrating and sad. He knew that the truth was far more subtle and far more dignified than the headlines suggested. Kate had acted with thoughtfulness, patience, and an understanding of the delicate social balance within the palace, qualities that most people would never recognize. During this time, James continued his duties with unwavering focus. He moved silently through corridors, watched guests arrive, and observed family interactions with his usual keen eye. But now, every time he passed the Tiara display, he remembered the night of the gala. He remembered Kate's careful gestures, the respectful way she interacted, and the unspoken diplomacy in her eyes. Each detail was a reminder of her strength and poise, and each false story in the media reminded him of the fragility of reputation. Even within the palace, the gossip caused subtle tension. Some staff members discussed the event privately, sharing opinions they had heard or imagined. James could see the small effects it had on Kate. A polite smile might hide a moment of irritation. A carefully measured nod might conceal disappointment. Yet she never let these feelings show publicly. Her ability to manage emotions quietly, without drawing attention to herself, was one of the reasons James admired her so deeply. She embodied the essence of royal composure, a combination of kindness, patience, and quiet determination. James also noticed how the palace environment amplified every small misunderstanding. In such an enclosed and high-pressure space, even minor incidents could be blown out of proportion. Guests interpreted polite gestures differently, staff misread subtle cues, and media outlets often relied on incomplete information. In this environment, perception often mattered more than reality. James reflected on how easy it would be for someone to misjudge Kate based on a single photograph or overheard conversation. He knew firsthand that she had acted appropriately, with thoughtfulness and respect, even during what could have been an awkward moment. Despite the growing rumors, James continued to carry out his duties with unwavering professionalism. He stood at attention during official ceremonies, guided guests politely through corridors, and ensured that everything within his responsibility ran smoothly. Yet, behind the uniform and the disciplined exterior, he carried the memory of the Tiara incident as a quiet truth. It was a truth that few would ever know, a truth that revealed the human side of a public figure who was often misunderstood. James also observed how Kate handled her public engagements during this period. Despite the rumors, she attended events with grace, greeted children and elderly citizens alike, and participated in charity initiatives. She maintained a positive image in public, even as false stories circulated. James understood that this required immense inner strength. To manage public perception while remaining true to oneself was a challenge few could comprehend, and yet Kate managed it consistently. Her composure and dedication were part of what made her respected within the palace and admired by the public, even when stories suggested otherwise. As weeks passed, James reflected more on the nature of perception and truth. The media and public might focus on a single event, misinterpret gestures, or speculate endlessly. But he knew that real understanding required patience, observation, and empathy. He had witnessed the reality behind the headlines, a moment of tension handled with calmness, respect, and dignity. He realized that truth was often invisible to the masses, but that did not make it any less important. For those who had seen it, like James, it carried significant weight. James also began to understand the broader lesson in what he had observed. Life in the palace was filled with moments that could easily be misjudged, and it required a steady mind and a kind heart to navigate them. Kate's ability to maintain grace in the face of misunderstanding was a testament to her character. He admired her not because of her title or position, but because of the quiet strength she displayed every day, often without acknowledgement. The Tiara incident was only one small example of how she managed challenges with dignity and care. Even though the false stories continued, James found comfort in the knowledge that he had witnessed the truth. He carried it silently, knowing that one day it might matter. Until that time, he remained devoted to his duties, a guardian of both the palace and the realities within it. Each day, he observed, protected, and recorded in his mind the subtle truths that others might never see. And each day, he was reminded that life behind palace walls was more complex, more human, and more intricate than anyone outside could imagine. In the quiet moments, when the palace corridors were empty and the chandeliers cast long shadows, James reflected on the importance of perspective. He thought about how quickly stories could be twisted, how easily gestures could be misinterpreted, and how often true intentions were invisible. He knew that Kate's actions had been exemplary, measured, and thoughtful. And while the world might never see these moments in full, he carried them in his memory, a testament to her grace and the unseen challenges of life in the royal spotlight. As months passed, James Whittaker continued his duties at Buckingham Palace with the same dedication he always had. But the memory of the Tiara incident lingered in his mind, more vivid than ever. Each day, as he walked the halls, guided guests, or stood at attention during ceremonies, he replayed the moment in his mind. Every gesture, every glance, every subtle word exchanged was etched into his memory. Unlike others, James could see the layers behind every action, the quiet intentions that the public never noticed. The palace had its rhythms. There were official events, dinners, meetings, and charity appearances, each carefully planned and executed. Yet, beneath the polished exterior, the palace staff and royal family navigated complex human relationships every day. James noticed that rumors and misinterpretations could spread even within these walls. Small misunderstandings among staff sometimes escalated into tense situations, and James, trained to observe and not interfere, often felt the weight of knowing more than he could share. Kate continued her public engagements gracefully, attending charity events, meeting dignitaries, and participating in community programs. To the outside world, she seemed serene, almost untouchable. But James, having witnessed her handling of the Tiara incident, knew the strength it took to maintain that composure. There were moments when she would pause, taking a breath before entering a room, moments when her eyes would briefly reflect the inner pressure she felt. These small signs, invisible to most, spoke volumes to James. They were evidence of her patience, resilience, and unwavering sense of duty. Despite her composed exterior, James could see the subtle impact of the false stories circulating about the gala. While she did not show it openly, he noticed slight gestures, a momentary tightening of her hands, a brief sigh, or a quiet pause before speaking, that suggested the burden of misunderstanding. These gestures were fleeting and easily overlooked, yet they revealed the human side of someone often seen only as a public figure. James admired the way she carried herself, understanding that true strength often resides in quiet endurance rather than in bold statements. Meanwhile, the palace staff continued to whisper. Some speculated about what had happened during the gala, sharing second-hand stories and opinions. Others tried to piece together events based on fragments of information. James observed these interactions carefully, knowing that even a small word or gesture could escalate into a larger misunderstanding. He remained silent, as his duty required, but internally he cataloged every detail with meticulous care. He knew that the truth of what he had seen was fragile, yet invaluable. In the evenings, after the palace had quieted and the guests had left, James often reflected on the nature of perception. Life at the palace was a delicate balance between public image and private reality. Small moments could be misinterpreted, and actions could be judged without context. He thought about the Tiara incident and how a single misunderstanding had grown into a story that misrepresented Kate's character. In his mind, the contrast between appearance and reality became clearer each day. What the public saw was only the surface. The true story lay in the subtle, thoughtful actions that James had observed firsthand. The more he thought about it, the more he understood the immense pressure Kate faced. As a member of the royal family, every move was scrutinized. Every gesture, no matter how small, could be photographed, analyzed, and judged. And yet, she carried herself with elegance, treating everyone she met with kindness and respect, even in moments of private tension. James recognized that this required not only courage, but also an understanding of human nature and a deep sense of empathy. The way she managed difficult situations with calm and dignity was a lesson in leadership that few could appreciate. James also noticed how the media amplified small events into large controversies. Photos taken out of context, snippets of conversation, and brief gestures could be turned into headlines that misrepresented the truth. He reflected on how easily a story could be distorted when people did not have the full picture. The Tiara incident, seemingly minor, had become a topic of discussion far beyond the walls of the palace. James realized that this was part of the life he had chosen to witness, a life where truth and perception often diverged and where careful observation was essential. Despite the weight of his knowledge, James found ways to cope. He focused on his duties, maintaining professionalism and attention to detail. He guided guests politely, ensured security, and observed the daily life of the palace with patience and care. Each day provided new moments to witness, new interactions to study, and new examples of human nature at work. Through this, he continued to see Kate not just as a public figure, but as a person navigating complex social dynamics with intelligence, kindness, and quiet strength. There were evenings when James would recall small, telling moments from the gala, the way Kate had gently adjusted her hair, the calmness in her tone, the subtle diplomacy in her expressions. These memories reminded him that actions, no matter how small, carried meaning. They reflected character, intention, and integrity. While others judged based on limited observations, James had the privilege of seeing the full context, the true story behind the public image. He also thought about the broader lessons from what he had witnessed. Life in the palace mirrored life in the wider world in many ways. Misunderstandings could grow quickly, appearances could deceive, and truth was often invisible. Observing Kate's response to the Tiara incident taught him the value of patience, resilience, and measured action. He admired how she balanced grace with strength, showing kindness without compromising her principles, and maintaining composure in the face of misinterpretation. As time passed, James began to feel the burden of silence more keenly. He understood the responsibility of witnessing events without sharing them. The knowledge he held was powerful, yet he could not act on it openly without breaking his code. It was a delicate tension, one that required discretion, restraint, and trust in the integrity of the palace and the people within it. Yet, he found solace in knowing that truth existed, even if it remained unseen by the public. He also began to notice subtle changes in Kate over time. The rumors and speculation had not broken her spirit, but they had required her to develop even greater patience. She continued to smile politely at guests, engage warmly with the public, and participate fully in her royal duties. Behind these actions, James could see a quiet determination, a sense of purpose that transcended the challenges of misjudgment and misunderstanding. The Tiara incident had been a small test, but it revealed the depth of her character in ways that no headline could capture. James often reflected on the importance of witnessing and remembering. His role as a palace guard was not simply to maintain order. It was to observe, understand, and preserve the subtle truths that defined life within the royal household. Every gesture, every glance, every interaction carried meaning. And in the case of the Tiara incident, he had seen a truth that contradicted public perception, a truth that spoke of grace, intelligence, and dignity. He knew that one day, circumstances might allow the story to be told. Until that moment, he continued his work with diligence and care, carrying the memory quietly in his mind. Each day, he reminded himself of the lessons he had learned, that appearances could be misleading, that strength often lay in quiet composure, and that true character revealed itself in subtle, thoughtful actions. Through it all, James maintained his respect and admiration for Kate Middleton. He understood that the public often judged without understanding, and that media narratives could distort reality. Yet he also recognized the resilience required to navigate life in the royal spotlight. The Tiara incident, though minor in appearance, had revealed the qualities that defined her character: patience, intelligence, diplomacy, and an unwavering sense of dignity. In quiet moments, James reflected on how the Tiara incident had shaped his understanding of human behavior, perception, and truth. He realized that witnessing such moments was a privilege and a responsibility. The palace, with its grandeur and history, was also a place of human complexity, where small actions carried deep significance. Through it all, Kate Middleton had demonstrated that grace under pressure was not simply a public performance. It was a reflection of genuine character. For years, James Whittaker carried the memory of the Tiara incident silently, tucked away behind the disciplined composure required of a palace guard. Each day, he witnessed the graceful poise with which Kate Middleton navigated life within Buckingham Palace. Yet the false rumors and exaggerated headlines from that gala night still lingered in his mind. The truth remained invisible to the public, and he often wondered how long it would take for the world to see what he had seen firsthand. It was a quiet Tuesday morning when James received an unexpected visit from a journalist. She was polite but determined, someone who had earned a reputation for thorough research and careful verification. James felt a mixture of anxiety and curiosity. Speaking about anything within the palace was strictly forbidden, yet here was someone who seemed genuinely interested in understanding what had happened, someone who respected discretion and accuracy. The journalist explained that she was working on a documentary about life inside the royal household. She had interviewed numerous staff members, palace officials, and insiders. Through careful investigation, she had learned about James's reputation as a trusted observer, someone who had been present during critical private moments, yet remained discreet. After months of research, she had convinced herself that James held the key to understanding a story that had been misreported for years. James listened carefully. He knew that what he was about to share could have far-reaching consequences, but he also recognized the importance of truth. The Tiara incident, minor as it had seemed, had been misrepresented, creating an unfair narrative about Kate Middleton. He recalled every detail, the delicate adjustment of her hair, the measured tone of her words, the subtle gestures that revealed her calm and diplomatic approach. He began to recount the evening, slowly at first, then with increasing confidence as he remembered each moment clearly. He described the gala, the glittering chandeliers, the carefully arranged flowers, and the gentle hum of conversation. He explained how the tiara had become the focal point of tension, not because of conflict or confrontation, but because of miscommunication and misinterpretation. He spoke about Kate's composure, the quiet strength in her posture, and the thoughtfulness behind every gesture. The journalist took notes, occasionally asking gentle, clarifying questions. James appreciated her careful approach. She was not there to sensationalize the story, but to uncover the truth. He described how the other guests' expressions and movements had been misread by observers and the media, leading to exaggerated narratives. He explained that what had seemed like a clash was actually a moment of polite negotiation, diplomacy, and subtle communication. As James continued, he realized how important it was to convey the nuance of what he had witnessed. The public often judged based on images, sound bites, or brief accounts, rarely considering the context or intention behind actions. The Tiara incident had been blown out of proportion, creating an unfair story that misrepresented Kate's character. He wanted to make sure that her dignity, patience, and intelligence were recognized, even if the general public could not fully grasp the subtlety of the event. The journalist listened intently, her eyes reflecting a mix of admiration and understanding. She seemed to sense the weight James carried, the responsibility of witnessing private moments without revealing them, and the burden of seeing truth distorted by rumor. She encouraged him to continue, asking him to describe the small gestures and interactions that most people would never notice, yet which spoke volumes about Kate's character. James described the exact moment when the tension had peaked. Kate had adjusted her hair gently, keeping her tone calm and polite. The other guest had leaned closer, their expression sharp for only a moment, before Kate responded with measured words that diffused the situation. She had maintained grace, even under subtle pressure, and had handled the interaction with diplomacy and kindness. Every action was intentional, thoughtful, and composed. As he recounted the incident, James felt a sense of relief. For years, he had carried this truth silently, aware that the public narrative had misrepresented Kate. Now, for the first time, someone was listening with understanding and care. He realized that the act of sharing this story, responsibly and truthfully, was a form of justice, not only for Kate, but also for the integrity of the palace and the people who lived and worked within it. The journalist asked him about the aftermath of the gala and how the rumors had affected the palace environment. James explained that, While Kate had remained composed publicly, he had noticed subtle signs of the emotional toll. Brief sighs, careful pauses, and slight gestures revealed the pressure she had endured. Yet, she had continued her duties with unwavering grace, never allowing the false stories to disrupt her public engagements or charitable work. He also reflected on the broader significance of witnessing and preserving truth. Life within the palace was filled with moments that could easily be misunderstood, misinterpreted, or exaggerated. Guards like him had a responsibility not only to protect the physical space, but also to observe and understand the nuances of interactions that define the lives of those within. These moments, though private, carried weight and meaning that often went unnoticed by the public. The journalist thanked James for sharing his account and assured him that the documentary would present the story with accuracy and respect. She emphasized that the goal was not to sensationalize, but to provide a deeper understanding of life behind the palace walls. James felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that the truth about the Tiara incident and about Kate Middleton's dignity would finally be recognized. In the following weeks, the documentary was completed and released. James watched quietly as the story unfolded on screen, showing the carefully reconstructed events of that gala evening. The footage, combined with his first-hand account, clarified the misunderstanding surrounding the tiara. Viewers could see that Kate had acted with poise and diplomacy, and that what had been portrayed as a confrontation was actually a moment of subtle negotiation and grace. The reaction was immediate and profound. Social media, news outlets, and public discussions shifted in tone. People began to understand the nuance of the incident, appreciating Kate's patience, intelligence, and composure. The false narratives that had circulated for years were replaced with a more accurate portrayal, and James felt a sense of vindication, not for himself, but for the truth and for Kate Middleton. Within the palace, the atmosphere also shifted. Staff members who had long whispered and speculated now acknowledged the accuracy of James's account. Kate herself, though never seeking public attention for the matter, received quiet recognition from those who understood the true story. James continued his duties, observing and protecting, but he carried a renewed sense of purpose. The act of sharing the truth had restored balance, even if only in a small but significant way. James reflected on the lessons from the experience. He realized that truth often exists quietly, unseen by the masses, and that the courage to preserve and eventually reveal it is a rare and meaningful responsibility. The Tiara incident, though minor in appearance, had demonstrated the importance of observation, patience, and integrity. Kate Middleton's grace under pressure had inspired not only those who witnessed it directly, but also anyone who sought to understand the complexity of life within the palace. As he returned to his routine, James felt a quiet pride. He had fulfilled his duty as a guard and as a witness, preserving a story of dignity and truth. The palace continued to shine with its traditions, ceremonies, and daily routines, but the subtle human stories within its walls had been illuminated, at least for a moment. And for James, that was enough. The tiara, once a symbol of tension and misinterpretation, now represented something entirely different, a reminder that truth, patience, and quiet strength could withstand misunderstanding and rumor. James knew that life in the palace would always involve scrutiny, speculation, and challenges, but he had witnessed one small victory for justice and dignity. And in that victory, the human side of royalty, often hidden behind grandeur and protocol, had finally been recognized. After the documentary aired and James Whittaker's account became known, the atmosphere both inside and outside Buckingham Palace began to shift. For the first time, the public had a clearer understanding of the Tiara incident. Headlines that had once cast doubt on Kate Middleton's character were replaced with stories of her patience, grace, and quiet strength. Social media conversations became more thoughtful, with people discussing not only the incident itself, but also the pressures and challenges of life in the royal spotlight. James observed the changes with a quiet satisfaction. For years, he had carried the memory of that night alone, aware that the truth had been hidden beneath layers of misunderstanding and speculation. Now, that truth was recognized. Kate did not seek public recognition for what had happened, and she never needed it. But the acknowledgement of her composure and integrity provided a subtle, reassuring balance against the long tide of rumors. Within the palace, James noticed the small ways in which this shift affected daily life. Staff members no longer whispered as often about the gala or speculated about Kate's intentions. The corridors felt lighter, and a quiet sense of relief seemed to settle over those who had felt the tension of unspoken misunderstandings for years. Even minor gestures, like polite smiles or relaxed postures, seemed to indicate that the palace had regained a sense of calm and trust. Kate herself remained composed and graceful, attending her engagements and charity work with the same dedication as always. Yet James observed that there was a subtle ease in her demeanor, a quiet acknowledgement that truth had finally emerged. She did not speak openly about the Tiara incident, but her actions reflected a renewed confidence. Her patience and resilience, tested in moments of misunderstanding, had been validated, not through fanfare, but through the recognition of her character by those who had witnessed it accurately. James reflected on the journey that had led to this point. He thought about the gala night, the subtle gestures, and the careful diplomacy that had prevented what could have been a tense confrontation from escalating. He remembered how he had felt at the time, aware of the significance of the moment, yet bound by his duty to remain silent. For years, he had carried the memory like a private treasure, a testament to truth and integrity that few could see. Sharing it had been difficult but necessary. Now, seeing the acknowledgement that followed, he understood the value of patience and discretion. The documentary not only clarified the events of the Tiara incident, but also offered the public a glimpse into life behind the palace walls. Viewers could see the careful balance of tradition, protocol, and personal interaction that defined every day for the royal family. James watched as people began to appreciate the subtle complexities of these lives, how small gestures carried weight, how diplomacy could prevent conflict, and how grace under pressure was often invisible to those outside the palace. For James, the Tiara incident had become more than just a memory. It was a lesson in human behavior, perception, and integrity. He realized that truth could be fragile, easily distorted by speculation and misunderstanding, yet resilient when preserved by those who witnessed it with care. Kate's composure and thoughtfulness had endured despite misrepresentation, and his role as an observer had been a quiet but crucial part of ensuring that the reality of her actions was never lost entirely. The broader impact of the revelation was also significant. People began to recognize that public figures often face challenges invisible to the outside world. Small gestures could be misinterpreted, moments of diplomacy could be overlooked, and personal patience could be mistaken for weakness. Kate Middleton's handling of the Tiara incident became a symbol of resilience, demonstrating that true strength often lies in quiet, thoughtful action rather than in public confrontation. James continued his duties as a palace guard with renewed pride and purpose. Each day, he observed interactions, guided guests, and ensured the security of the palace with the same professionalism as always. Yet now, there was an added sense of fulfillment. He had fulfilled a responsibility that went beyond physical security. He had preserved and ultimately shared a truth that mattered. The knowledge that the public now had a more accurate understanding of the events provided a subtle but powerful sense of justice. Even in quiet moments, James reflected on the importance of perspective. Life within the palace, with its grandeur and historical significance, was also filled with ordinary human experiences. Misunderstandings could arise from the smallest gestures, and reputations could be affected by what others assumed rather than what actually occurred. Witnessing and remembering the nuances of behavior, therefore, was not merely an occupational skill, it was a moral responsibility. Kate's quiet vindication also reminded James of the resilience required to navigate life in the public eye. She had faced rumors and misjudgments with patience and intelligence, maintaining her dignity without seeking validation. This had been her approach not only during the Tiara incident but throughout her public life. James admired her ability to balance the expectations of the palace, the pressures of media scrutiny, and the need to act thoughtfully in every situation. Her grace had never wavered, and the recognition of her conduct reinforced the value of integrity, patience, and quiet courage. Over time, the tiara itself became less of a symbol of tension and more of a reminder of the lessons learned. It represented diplomacy, careful observation, and the subtle ways in which personal integrity could withstand misinterpretation. For James, it was a symbol of the moments that truly mattered, the unseen gestures, the quiet decisions, and the human interactions that shaped life in ways the public rarely observed. The tiara was no longer a source of gossip, but a marker of dignity, patience, and the resilience of character. The public's renewed understanding of the incident also had a personal impact on James. He felt a sense of closure that he had not anticipated. For years, he had carried the weight of knowing the truth while watching others speculate incorrectly. Now, that burden had been lifted. The truth had been shared responsibly, and the integrity of Kate Middleton's actions was publicly recognized. He could return fully to his duties without the quiet tension that had accompanied the memory of the gala for so long. James also reflected on the broader lessons for anyone navigating life under scrutiny. The tiara incident showed that misunderstandings were inevitable, especially when actions were interpreted without context. But it also showed that true character could withstand misrepresentation when guided by patience, composure, and integrity. Kate's handling of the situation became a model of how to manage challenging circumstances with dignity, demonstrating that quiet strength could speak louder than any public statement. In the end, life at Buckingham Palace returned to its rhythm, but the story of the tiara incident remained significant. It served as a reminder that public perception is often incomplete, and that the truth, while sometimes hidden, has value beyond immediate recognition. James continued his work as a guard, observing, protecting, and remembering, carrying with him the knowledge that one small act of vigilance and honesty could have a lasting impact on the understanding of history and character. Kate Middleton, quietly continuing her royal duties, carried herself with the same elegance and thoughtfulness as ever. Yet, there was a subtle lightness in her demeanor, a quiet affirmation that her integrity had been acknowledged. For James, this was the ultimate vindication, not for himself, but for the truth and for the dignity of someone he had long admired. The tiara, once a symbol of tension and misinterpretation, had become a symbol of resilience, patience, and the quiet triumph of integrity. In the quiet halls of the palace, James often paused to reflect on the events that had unfolded. He knew that life within these walls would always include challenges, misunderstandings, and pressures that few could comprehend. But he also knew that truth and dignity, when preserved and eventually revealed, had the power to correct misperceptions and restore balance. The tiara incident, small as it had seemed, had become a lasting lesson in observation, patience, and the power of quiet courage. Ultimately, James understood that the story was not just about a tiara or a moment of tension. It was about human character, the importance of perspective, and the ways in which truth, patience, and thoughtful action could prevail over rumor and misjudgment. Kate Middleton's grace, tested and observed in a moment of subtle challenge, had been vindicated. And for James, the knowledge that he had witnessed, preserved, and shared this truth became a defining achievement in his life, a testament to the enduring value of integrity and quiet courage.